Hello. George Orwell has been a long-time favorite author of mine, and the Orwell Foundation oversees a series of prizes. There's a fiction award and a non-fiction award. So today I want to discuss the shortlists in these categories for the 2025 awards. And they seek to honor books which come close to Orwell's ambition to make political writing into an art. And last year's winner of the fiction prize was My Friends by Hisham Matar, and this book truly does that. I think this is an absolutely tremendous story. It was one of my favorite books that I read last year, so I'm really looking forward to reading more from the categories for this year's prizes, and the awards are going to be given out very, very soon on Wednesday, June 25th, so not long from now. So obviously I won't have time to read all of these books. I've read a few of them already, but how I thought I would go through the books is go through and discuss the judges' comments on each of the books, and then give any extra thoughts or feelings that I have about all of these books. But I would love to know if you have read any of these books, if you would also recommend them, if there are any books that you are rooting to win, either the fiction or the non-fiction category, or if you're interested in reading any of them now. I would love to hear about that in the comments below. So here are the 8 books that have been shortlisted for the fiction category. And right off the bat, I'm going to talk about Elif Shafak's There Are Rivers in the Sky. And this was another one of my favorite novels that I read last year. So here are the judges' comments on this. They say, the interconnectedness of water and human experience are beautifully expressed in Elif Shafak's epic century-spanning novel, taking in Nineveh and London, the Thames and the Tigris, Gilgamesh and Dickens. This is truly ambitious and profound writing in which a number of political and moral questions about religion, heritage, imperialism, and the climate are elegantly raised and explored. And I absolutely agree that this book does all of that and so much more. I found myself completely swept up in the journey in this story, all the way back, starting from ancient Mesopotamia and following the actual path of the Epic of Gilgamesh as it's passed down through the generations, and then following 3 primary characters who are in different places and in different times, but they are all connected to each other in surprising ways. And the way that their stories come together, I think, is so beautiful and moving and says something so much more. And they are all united through a single drop of water, and I think this is just gorgeous. And I'm going to say right from the very beginning that I haven't read, obviously, all of the books on the list, but I hope that this wins the fiction prize, because I think it really deserves a book award. The Accidental Immigrants by Joe McMillan, and the judges say of this book, this cleverly conceived, inventively written political fable proves propulsively readable, dedicated to all the people who lose their lives trying to reach a safer shore. The Accidental Immigrant centers on a British couple living on an island in the Mediterranean that, as the far right rises, find themselves first disconcerted, but then displaced and torn apart by increasingly totalitarian state policies and policing. McMillan's characters might inhabit a looking-glass universe, but in reading this incisive critique of anti-immigration politics, we stare straight back at ourselves. This humane, sensitive novel is insidiously shocking, and it looks set to become even more politically relevant given recent electoral results in the UK, Europe, and the US. And I had not heard of this book before this prize list, and it's one of the reasons why I love following book prizes, to discover books that I might just not have come across before. It's published by Blue Moose Books, who are so fantastic. They bring out really unique and exciting books, and I think it's really striking how this begins with a kind of form being filled out where it says says, "What is your full name? And have you ever used any other name?" And underneath there, it's kind of scribbled out. And I've always found this a really powerful device in fiction when there's a kind of form and you can see the thought process and what is going on for the person that is trying to fill out this form. So I think this sounds really fascinating. Universality by Natasha Brown. And the judges say of this book, "Nobody in current British politics, left or right, righteous or heartless, selfish or selfless, escapes from Natasha Brown's short but weighty universality unscathed. This is a smart, uncompromising novel from a talented, intrepid writer, all while being a gripping thriller too." And so this story, it is a thriller in some ways, because it begins with this very dramatic incident of a man on a commune during lockdown being hit on the back of his head with a gold bar, and a journalist who is writing the story of this and interviewing a number of people about it. But then the story goes beyond this news story to explore these characters' lives in more detail and complexity. And I was drawn all the way through. I mean, it is quite a short book, and she does pack a lot into it, and a lot of people have loved this book, but I felt quite mixed about it. I was left a little bit wanting from it, although I think it's really fascinating trying to approach this topic of journalism and how we the influence that goes into different journalist stories, and then how those are consumed and interpreted and partly shaped by public opinion rather than just purely the facts, and how all journalism gives a certain slant on the truth in this way. And for me, its exploration of characters just didn't quite come together. But yes, a lot of people loved this book. I was a big fan of Natasha Brown's Assembly, and I do think she's a really fascinating and exciting writer. Heart, Be at Peace by Donal Ryan. And the judges say, 21 voices from a small town in Ireland come together to paint a picture of a community in all its complexity. After the economic crisis, there are dark undercurrents of criminality moving through to fill the gaps left by a lack of jobs and hope. But there is also tenderness and beauty. All of life is here, and the way ordinary lives are shaped by forces outside of their control is powerfully evoked. And so I've just started reading this novel because I've been anticipating it and wanting to read it for so long. And so it being on this shortlist feels like a sign that I definitely need to finally get to it. So I've read the first few chapters, and yes, as he switches between the voices of a number of different people in this community, he so powerfully embeds us in their point of view, to see the world through their eyes and get their own perspective on and take on things. And of course, they unintentionally start revealing things about their own personality, of their hopes and aspirations, but also their prejudices. And I think it's so fascinating how he's switching between these voices. And at least so far from what I've read, each of them feels so distinct. And I've read a number of books and short stories by Donal Ryan before, and he is such a fantastic writer. Parallel Lines by Edward St. Aubyn. And there is a 1984 reference in this book, because the judges begin with a quote saying, "The Ministry of Truth is now tightening its grip by the hour," comments one character in Edward St. Aubyn's new book, a State of the Nation novel that brilliantly uses the conventions of farce, satire, and social critique to evoke a nation drifting indifferently into chaos. Written in riotously creative language, St. Aubyn's portrait of the family and its sharp-edged sketches of various institutions of British life are often very, very funny and always penetrating, but they are also at times moving, especially when they relate to mental health. Parallel lines which never seems parochial despite its apparently insular metropolitan setting reinvents the so-called Hampstead novel with formal verve and political vitality. And now I've only read one book by this author before, Never Mind, which is the first in a series of books. And I did find it absolutely gripping and so beautifully written. And I've been wanting to read more by this author, but I also know that this novel is a kind of sequel to his previous book, Double Blind, and I've not read that book. So I do want to go back and read that book first before getting to this new one, because I have heard that it provides some background knowledge to the story, which is helpful going into it. But I do really want to read that book and all of the rest of his books, because he is such an excellent writer. Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, this much anticipated novel. And the judges say of this book that the lives of four interconnected women, their loves, their ambitions, their disappointments, their traumas are scrutinized in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's dazzling fourth novel set across 3 continents and a sprawling cast of characters. Dream Count is a polyphonic work that engages with a range of charged themes, from the diaspora experience to sexual assault and the politics of female bodies. It is rigorously, bracingly contemporary, and yet it has a timelessness that characterizes all great fiction. And I have read this book, and I have been a big fan of Adichie's work in the past. I have to say, I don't think this is her strongest novel. There are lots of fascinating things about this book, really interesting topics that are explored in a dynamic way, but I think she tries to handle slightly too much in this book by having trying to balance 4 different characters, and then one of the characters, an incident which occurs to her is based on a real historical incident of a rape and the trial following that, and it's fantastic that she pays tribute to this case, but it does feel like that story is kind of crammed into this, and then it kind of takes over the novel in a way when there are a number of other narratives going on as well. So for me, it didn't entirely work, but yes, there are a lot of fascinating things about it, and Adichie is a tricky figure, and I made a whole video about that. HARROW by Noah Eaton, and the judges say of this book, don't be fooled by the HARROW's seeming simplicity or by its uncluttered directness. It is a thriller and whodunit, yes, but it is also a novel rousingly elevated beyond its genre by a greater purpose, its analysis of council politics and the inevitable, but sad and irretrievable loss of local journalism. And that makes me really intrigued, because this is another book that I hadn't heard of before this book prize. So I'm also going to read the description of the plot on the inside cover, because the judges don't say about what actually happens in the story of this book very much. So the description of the plot is: welcome to the HARROW, last survivor of London's once notorious muck-raking magazines, John Salmon. Its battle-hardened editor and his misfit journalists have fought for years to keep it alive, but extinction looms. Neither the arrival of trainee Danny Roth nor a local gangland killing looks set to change that, but as John reluctantly allows Danny to investigate the murder, they soon find themselves entangled in a story that could save the HARROW, but might cost them their lives. So yeah, I can definitely see how this is a kind of thriller and a kind of mystery story about who killed a certain person. And yeah, this isn't the sort of book that I would naturally be drawn to or pick up, but I am now intrigued. And the final novel on the political fiction book prize list is Precipice by Robert Harris. And the judges say of this book, in his fictional account of the affair between aging British Prime Minister H.H. Asquith and the vivacious young aristocrat Venetia Stanley during the summer of 1914, Robert Harris brings one of the most consequential chapters of modern history to life. Precipice spins a riveting drama around Asquith's surviving letters to his lover, in which he details his romantic yearnings alongside top-secret intelligence as Europe hurtles headlong into World War I. In doing so, the novel, with great deftness and wit, explores the extent to which political power is shaped by the personal lives of those who wield it. And that sounds like such a fascinating and gripping story about a really crucial incident from history and relationship. And I'm slightly ashamed to admit, I've never read a Robert Harris novel. I know that he's a massively popular novelist, and there's been renewed interest in his novel Conclave following the election of a new pope recently. So this would be really fascinating to try. Now, these are the 8 nonfiction titles that have been shortlisted for the Political Writing Book Prize, and I don't often read all that much nonfiction, although I have been reading much more recently because I was reading some of the books that have been listed for this year's Women's Prize for nonfiction, and I found so many fantastic titles and stories through that. So I do want to read more. And it does sound like so many of these books really deal with some of the most pressing issues of our day. So I'm really looking forward to reading a number of these books. And the very first book on the shortlist is At the Edge of Empire by Edward Wong. And the judges say of this book, growing up, Edward Wong didn't hear his father talk much about the older man's life in China. Perhaps that's why Wong found himself retracing the elder Wong's footsteps through the borderlands of the Chinese Empire in his work as the New York Times Beijing correspondent. Hong Kong, Harbin, Xinjiang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, the lives of the two men weave together to form the thread connecting this grand yet personal account of 70 years of Chinese history. And I do love entering into the history of different nations and exploring different time periods through personal family stories, and it really sounds like that this is what this book does. Also, there are a number of personal pictures in this book, and look at this incredibly sweet picture of his parents on their wedding day. Autocracy, Inc. And the judges say Anne Applebaum provides a thoroughly documented survey of the way in which autocratic regimes around the world are involved in deep webs of corruption and impunity. She achieves this with a cool, analytical tone that never lapses into rage, that leaves much for readers to feel and express themselves. And this was one of the books that was longlisted for this year's Women's Prize for Nonfiction, and I always think it's a great sign when books appear on multiple prize lists. I think it speaks very highly of them, and but it's one that I hadn't got to, and I still want to. So this is a great reminder to do that, and I've heard Anne Applebaum as a commentator on different news programs, and she's always really interesting and insightful. Broken Threads, My Family from Empire to Independence by Mishal, Husain. And the judges say the title implies this is a family memoir against a dramatic historical backdrop. It is, and much more. Mishal Husain's painstaking research allows us to share a view onto the tumult in the Indian subcontinent before, during, and after the end of British colonial rule. The threads of her family life's histories weave with those of partition. They are as relevant and current as ever and show us what the enduring conflict arising from those times means to human life. It's painful as well as painstaking. It's beautiful, and I think this sounds so fascinating, and of course is very topical given the recent resurgence of very high tensions between Pakistan and India. The World of the Cold War, 1945 to 1991 by Vladislav Zubok, and the judges say Vladislav Zubok has produced an extraordinarily comprehensive account of the Cold War from 1945 to its apparent demise in 1991. He manages to incorporate the perspectives of nearly all the many states across the globe that became involved at some time or another. This is a scholarly, well-researched book that nevertheless never loses its clear narrative drive. And I think this sounds so interesting because I've never really understood the background of the Cold War, how it surged up and then became such a presence and influence upon the world. So I'll be so fascinated to read and learn about this history. Looking at Women, Looking at War, A War and Justice Diary by Victoria Amelina. And look right there, forward by Margaret Atwood. The judges say, "This is a memoir about a war not yet ended, which could have undermined its power. Yet from the opening chapter to the close, the power of the image of women looking at war is relentless and necessary." Amelina is setting off for a holiday with her young son as the war comes chasing after her and everyone else in Ukraine. She is finishing a funding application for a literary festival whilst standing in the security queue at the airport, checking her phone for news and thinking about my new gun and why I, a nearsighted bookworm, decided to buy it. Thus, a beautifully written book, technically unfinished, but with a tragic completeness, unfolds. And also, I want to read the quote from Margaret Atwood on the back of this book, which she says, Amelina's writing is hasty, urgent, up close and personal, detailed and sensual. She follows in the honorable footsteps of earlier women war reporters such as Martha Gellhorn. Artists like Amelina help us to see, but also to feel. They serve as our eyes. Amelina's talent as a novelist was of great service to her, and now it is of great service to us. And wow, I think that sounds so powerful and relevant and meaningful. The Forbidden Garden of Leningrad, a true story of science and sacrifice in a city under siege by Simon Parkin. And the judges say, war throws into sharp relief what's important to us. It forces us to decide what we save and what we sacrifice. Simon Parkin takes us to the darkest days of the Nazi siege of Leningrad, where a group of botanists faced a terrible dilemma. Having amassed the world's greatest seed bank in the hope of ending famine for all humans one day, they now guarded their vast stash of nutritious specimens at the heart of a city that was starving to death. Artfully told, this is a beautiful and harrowing tale of science, politics, and principle in times of war. And I heard Simon Parkin talking about this book at a literary event last year, and I thought it sounded so fascinating and harrowing and throws up so many moral dilemmas, but is also just such a fascinating incident from history that I had never heard of before. And so I'm so glad to have a copy of this book now because I am really eager to read it. The Baton and the Cross, Russia's Church from Pagans to Putin by Lucy Ash. And the judges say Vladimir Putin was mocked for being a bore when he lectured Fox News' Tucker Carlson about Russian history from the 9th century onwards. But this book proves that the past holds many valuable lessons for the Russia of today, in particular the power of the Orthodox Church for would-be rulers of Russia. Ash deftly recounts a concise and never boring timeline of the collaboration and competition between the church and the state throughout the centuries. Building up a powerful thesis under Putin's Russia, the church has once again become an arm of the state. And this sounds so interesting because I've never really heard much about the church's influence in Russia before. I mean, I know the church is a big thing in Russia, but never much about how it works in tandem with the state or maybe in competition with it. So I think this sounds like a really fascinating history that, again, I'm sure we'll speak about so many issues that we hear about in the world today. And finally, on the Political Writing Book Prize shortlist, there is The Coming Storm, A Journey into the Heart of the Conspiracy Machine by Gabriel Gatehouse. And the judges say Gabriel Gatehouse has taken us on a deep dive in the dark and toxic waters of the American conspiracy theory epidemic. Why are the Clintons the target of so much craziness? What lies behind QAnon? Who planned the 6th January assault on the Capitol? It's all here in this riveting page-turner alongside a cast of characters ranging from the eccentric through the exotic to the downright sinister. The conclusion? You couldn't make it up, but it's real. It is doing profound damage to the fabric of America, and sometime soon the virus will reach our shores. And this sounds so interesting, and I mean, just to learn the story about like so many of these conspiracies that have been running through the internet and worming their way into the politics of the world today. I think this sounds fascinating and like a really great read, as do many of these books. So I'm really looking forward to reading more of the books from these shortlists, and it'll be really exciting to see who the winner is in each of these categories in just a few days' time. But again, I would love to hear if you have read any of these books and tell me what you think about them. What should I prioritize and read first? Or what are you most interested from reading from these different lists? And do you have any favorites to win from either of these book prize lists? Please let me know all about that in the comments below. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.